1796. Winter, Hampshire, England. At a country ball, two young people of 20 danced 3 dances together in a row. In that era, 1 dance was courtesy, 2 dances was flirtation, and 3 dances, that was as good as announcing to the entire room, "We're together." He was Tom Lefroy Irish, studying law at Lincoln's Inn in London. She was Jane Austen, the daughter of a country parson from Steventon, Hampshire. 2 weeks later, she wrote a letter to her sister Cassandra. "The day has finally come. I am to have my last flirtation with Tom Lefroy. By the time this letter reaches you, it will all be over." My tears had already begun to fall as I wrote these words. He left, not because he stopped loving, but because he had no money. His tuition was funded by a distant great-uncle. If he were to marry a penniless pastor's daughter like himself, the financial support would be cut off immediately. Both families joined forces to strangle this romance in its cradle. Tom's aunt personally arranged for him to leave Hampshire early, and she happened to be Jane Austen's closest older female friend. Later, Tom Lefroy lived to the age of 93. He became the Lord Chief Justice of Ireland. He married someone else, and was surrounded by children and grandchildren. In his later years, when someone asked if he still remembered Jane Austen, he said, "That was a young man's love." But when the news came in 1817 that Jane Austen had died, he crossed the sea from Ireland to England. In 93 years of life, the only words he ever used to describe her were these: "A love from younger days." But he made up for it with his actions, 5 words that needed no saying: "Until death, I cannot forget." And Jane Austen, she never married Tom. Nearly 7 years later, another man proposed to her, one with money, land, and a stable future. She said yes. Then, in the early hours of the following morning, she took back her yes and never married, not for the rest of her life. For 200 years, everyone assumed this question had only 2 answers: marry for love or marry for money. But Jane Austen chose a third path. At the end of that road lay a £10 note from the Bank of England, the Queen's face on the front and her own face on the back. All of this she turned into a book. There are 2 sisters in this book. One leads with her head, the other with her heart. And there are 2 men, one who makes your pulse race, and one who makes you feel safe enough to close your eyes. There's a man who abandoned love for money, and a woman who waited a lifetime for love. And then there's a question. From 1811 to today, over 200 years have passed, and no one in the entire world has ever come up with a definitive answer. Should you marry for love or marry for money? Or perhaps the question itself is a trap because she's telling you in so many words that there is no third option beyond the 2 she's laid out? So, is that really what happened? Welcome to Fanko Character Insights. I'm Fanko. Today, we're stepping into the world of Jane Austen's Times, Sense and Sensibility. Ready? Let's begin. Let me first set the scene. In 1811, when Jane Austen published Times, Sense and Sensibility, British law worked like this. Under the system of entail, daughters often can't inherit their father's real estate. What does that mean? Your dad dies, and the house goes to your brother. Even if you were born in this house, grew up within these walls, and spent your entire childhood here, the law says it's not yours. And if your father had no son, then it's even worse. Inheritance by male cousins. A distant cousin you may have never even met could walk right in and sweep you out the door. And once you're married, even worse. There was a law in England at the time called the coverture law. The moment a woman got married, everything she owned, every single thing, automatically became her husband's property. She couldn't sign a contract, open a bank account, or write a will. Under the law, a married woman held the same legal standing as a criminal, a lunatic, or a child. This law remained in force until 1882, when it was finally repealed, and marital rape wouldn't be criminalized in England until 1991. In a world like this, marriage isn't romance. Marriage is survival. Marry the right man, and the rest of your life has somewhere to land. Marry the wrong one, and you're damned beyond redemption. Don't marry at all, and you're poor to the bone. A respectable woman who chooses not to marry, what options does she have? She can become a governess, earning somewhere between 12 and 30 pounds a year. And to maintain a decent middle-class life, you'd need at least 300 pounds a year. So how many years would a governess have to save before reaching financial freedom? Anywhere from 10 to 25 years. And the best part? You don't spend a single penny. Jane Austen herself once said, "Single women have a dreadful propensity for being poor," which is a very strong argument in favor of matrimony. This is the true undertone of time's Sense and Sensibility, not a romance novel, a survival story. With the backdrop now set, let our story begin. The master of Dashwood family has passed away. Under the law of inheritance, the estate and most of the fortune went to his eldest son, a child from his first marriage. Two daughters and their mother, forced to leave the Norland estate where they grew up, now find themselves taking refuge in a modest country cottage offered by a distant relative. What could they possibly bring with them? Pots and pans, bed sheets and covers, a few pieces of china. The eldest sister, Elinor, 19 years old, composed, perceptive, unshakable in a crisis. Mother's trusted counselor, her sister's shield and shelter. She once said something that captures her entire being. The things that make people happy are not always the things that ought to be done. Marianne, the younger sister, 17 years old, passionate, sensitive, and enormously gifted. The kind of girl who aches for autumn leaves, mourning the way they fall and are forgotten. She had just one criterion for a partner. He has to be on the same wavelength as me, obsessed with the same books, the same music. A woman who lived entirely inside her own head. One lives in the heart. And then the heartbeat arrives. Marianne and her little sister are taking a walk in the mountains. She breaks into a run down the hillside and twists her ankle, tumbling to the ground. At that moment, a man appeared. His name was Willoughby. In his left hand, two hunting hounds strained at their leashes. In his right, a rifle. The wind and rain seemed to cling to him like a second skin. He swept Marianne up into his arms and carried her all the way home. About his appearance, the book mentions it 3 times. Handsome and dashing, open and refined in manner, and his voice and expression only added to his charm. He said it 3 times, and all 3 times it meant the same thing. This was the man who lived inside a 17-year-old girl's dreams. But what came next? That was the truly devastating part. They started talking about books, talk about music, talk about poetry. On every single topic, Willoughby would tune himself to Marianne's exact frequency. And even when they disagreed, he always yielded gently, gracefully. Marianne was instantly convinced, this is my soulmate. And then the sweet poison began. Willoughby deliberately lost at cards, letting Marianne win. He proposed to give Marianne a horse in today's terms. That's like saying, I'll buy you a BMW, never mind whether you can actually afford to keep it. He took her on a tour of his estate, wandering through every room one by one, hinting, all the while, at the beautiful future that lay ahead for the two of them. He called her by her first name in front of everyone, Marianne, in a society where only engaged couples addressed each other so intimately. This was as good as a public announcement, she belongs to me. Everyone assumed they were engaged. Marianne began writing letters to him in those days, Only engaged couples exchanged correspondence. She even cut a lock of her hair and sent it to him. Only one thing has yet to happen. Willoughby has never publicly acknowledged this relationship. Not once, not ever. But when the sound of a heartbeat drowns out everything else, who would ever notice the silence? And then a cliff-edge disappearance. Willoughby suddenly announced he had to leave for London, an urgent matter that couldn't be spoken of. He left without a single letter. Marianne waited and waited. No word ever came. Finally, she saw him at a ball in London. She rushed toward him, her face full of hope. He looked at her, the way you look at a stranger. And then she received a letter. Dear Madam, I am unaware of anything I may have done to cause such a misunderstanding. I humbly request that you return my original letter, a perfectly proper letter. Suffocating propriety. 2 weeks later, Willoughby got married. The bride's name was Grey. What was so special about Miss Grey? She fell ill. The book says it in just 4 words. She had money and nothing more. Marianne collapsed. Not from drama, not from self-pity. She nearly died. Burning fever that wouldn't break, drifting in and out of consciousness, hovering on the edge of death. 17 years old, falling in love for the very first time, shattered completely, utterly shattered. But this is not a story about a player deceiving a naive, starry-eyed girl. Because the most terrifying part isn't that Willoughby never loved her. The most terrifying part is he did. It was real. And someone who once loved you but still chose to leave is 10,000 times more dangerous than someone who never loved you at all. Marianne's condition was at its worst that night, when someone came riding in at full gallop. Not Colonel Brandon, it was Willoughby. He was already married. He married the wealthy Miss Grey. By all expectations, he should have vanished into the warmth of some grand manor's fireplace, never to cross paths with Marianne again. And yet, he came. Drunk, soaked to the bone. And he didn't go to Marianne. He went to Elinor, the rational one, the composed one, the sister who never loses control. This choice alone reveals everything. He couldn't bring himself to face Marianne. He wasn't there to apologize. He was there to ask for one thing, a rational, composed forgiveness. More precisely, what he needed was someone clear-headed enough to hear him out and then tell him, "You're not such a bad person after all." If even someone as rational as Elinor could forgive him, then he could forgive himself. And so he began to speak. The very first sentence landed like a bomb. He said he was just having fun at first. I was playing up to her, trying to win her affections, with no real intention of taking it seriously. I know that was despicable of me. But then he shifts his tone. He admits that somewhere along the way, he genuinely fell in love with Marianne. He even considered proposing. It was because of his reckless spending, his shameful secret laid bare before his aunt, that he was stripped of his inheritance. Only then was he driven to set his sights on Miss Grey's fortune. It was never that he hadn't loved her at all. It was love, but he chose money. He admitted it. But the admission of one's own vileness is itself a kind of art. Because there's a strange kind of relief that comes when you confess your ugliness to someone else, as if saying it out loud somehow makes the sin lighter. And then he told her something else, a far earlier act and far more cruel. Before he ever met Marianne, he had seduced a young girl named Eliza, 16 years old. He got his adopted daughter pregnant, and then he vanished. He promised he'd come back, but he never came back, never wrote, never sent a single penny. When Colonel Brandon found out what had happened, he challenged Willoughby to a duel. 2 of them survived. That's exactly why When Brandon later watched Willoughby pursuing Marianne at the ball, he wore that grave expression, but said nothing. He'd seen this script play out before. A person who knows the ending, but has no right to spoil it, because that would mean exposing the privacy of an adopted daughter. A good person who stays silent, a bad person who speaks with ease. The world just happens to favor the latter. Let's go back to that night. Willoughby brought up Eliza in front of Elinor, and then said something that left her utterly speechless. Just because I'm the prodigal one, does that make her an angel? In that scandal, was the woman really without any blame at all? This is victim blaming, plain and simple. 1811 edition. He got a 16-year-old girl pregnant, abandoned her, and now he has the nerve to turn around and demand that his victim be a perfect victim. Otherwise, he wouldn't truly be guilty. He brings up that cold, heartless letter again. Dear Madam, I am not aware of anything I may have done to cause you such a misunderstanding. I am, he said. That letter, my wife made me write it. Brother, you cut off a lock of her hair. You walked her through your estate, room by room, each one a quiet promise of what was to come. And you called her Marianne in front of everyone. Then you have the nerve to say you don't know what you did to be misunderstood. It doesn't matter who wrote the letter. What matters is this: the whole performance, from beginning to end, was directed by you. But what truly makes this scene unsettling isn't Willoughby's shamelessness. It's Elinor's reaction. She had already written Willoughby off as a complete and utter villain, someone not worth a moment's thought or analysis. But after hearing his confession, his tears, his voice, the way he said, "I loved Marianne," she wavered. "I forgive you," she said. "I feel for you. I wish you all the best." This is the most dangerous moment in the entire book, because Austen proves something here. Even the most rational person, when faced with the most precisely aimed emotional assault, will surrender. Willoughby's confession is not a confession. It's a textbook case of emotional manipulation. First, consider the timing he chose to appear on the very night Marianne lay gravely ill, maximizing both the dramatic tension and his own moral leverage. And then there's his choice of target. He went to Elinor, the rational one, because earning forgiveness from someone smart carries far more absolution than earning it from the victim herself. And finally, the tools, tears, self-abasement, the narrative of "I was a victim too," and one carefully crafted line, "I loved her." Every step landed right on the pressure points of the heart. Even Elinor herself almost believed it, but she woke up. The next day, reason returned. He said something to Marianne that was remarkably clear-eyed. He regrets it now. But why does he regret it? Because he's discovered that things haven't turned out the way he'd hoped. He's no longer tormented by financial hardship, but now he feels his wife isn't quite charming enough. Yet, if he had married you instead, would happiness have truly been his? He felt no remorse, only inconvenience, just a different kind of inconvenience. He wasn't sorry for having hurt Marianne. He regrets not being able to keep every good thing clutched in his own hands. He wanted the money. He wanted the love, too. He wanted Miss Grey's fortune. And times, he wanted Marianne's warmth. She wanted a safe marriage, and she wanted a heart that burned and raced. A woman who wanted everything, and in the end, she got nothing at all. Later, Marianne married Colonel Brandon. When the news reached him, Willoughby was left with a lingering, gnawing regret. But the book also describes his life afterward, training horses, raising dogs, taking part in sports, day after day. You see, he felt remorse, but he also lived quite well. A viewer once summed up Willoughby's pattern of desire like this: a man's greed lies in his wish to possess every woman, and a woman's greed lies in her desire to possess a man completely, to own him entirely. Willoughby is the perfect specimen of the former. Let's run a thought experiment. If Willoughby had money of his own, if he didn't need a wealthy marriage to dig himself out of financial ruin, would he have married Marianne? Maybe he actually would have. But he will still be the one who seduced a 16-year-old girl and then abandoned her. Still the one who throws money around without restraint, who simply cannot control himself. Still the same man who needs others to keep him in check. Money won't make him a better person, and poverty was never his excuse to begin with. Willoughby's problem was never about being poor. It was about being greedy. 200 years have passed. Willoughby has worn countless faces, but the traits never change. Irresistible charm, bottomless selfishness, and that relentless need to have it all. You've probably met him at a party, scrolled past him on some dating app, had him zero in on you with unsettling precision in a relationship. Spotting him isn't hard. The hard part is when your heart has already started racing, whether you're still willing to open your eyes. And if Willoughby is the wrong answer, then who is right? Is it the same Colonel Brandon, the one in the flannel waistcoat, 35 years old, written off by everyone as far too old? Still the same Edward, quiet, unambitious, with nothing on his mind but becoming a country clergyman? Or perhaps the very notion of the right person is itself another trap. Let's keep going. If Marianne's love is a firework, dazzling, fleeting, and leaving nothing but ash, then her sister Elinor's love is more like a cup of warm water. The temperature isn't high. It won't burn your tongue, but you can't quite say whether it tastes good or not. The man Elinor loves is called Edward Ferrars. When this man first appears, the book describes him as plain-looking, with manners that only become agreeable once you've gotten to know him. Marianne's critique of him was more direct. She felt he lacked any genuine passion for music and art. But Elinor doesn't buy that assessment. She knows Edward is a man of substance, just not someone who knows how to show it. In today's terms, a basic guy. But he was a good man. He had certain qualities about him: generosity of spirit, simple living, a quiet humility. He'd studied at Oxford, yet harbored no great ambitions. All he ever wanted was to be a clergyman. In those days, being a clergyman was about as secure as it gets. Once a parish chose you, you had the job for life, with your income drawn straight from the tithes of your congregation. Stable, decent, never going to strike it rich, but never going to go hungry either. His greatest gift isn't talent. It's the way he sees times things. Details others haven't yet noticed, he catches them first. Like when he visits and immediately picks up on the charged atmosphere between Marianne and Willoughby. Elinor has feelings for him, not the kind that makes your heart race and your cheeks flush. That kind of fondness that says, this person is reliable. Talking to him just feels easy. In today's terms, this isn't butterflies. This is time's compatibility. And then the bomb drops. A woman named Lucy Steele sought out Elinor on her own initiative. She took Elinor's hand, leaning in with the air of someone about to bare their soul, and dropped her voice to a near whisper. I'm going to tell you a secret. This is a secret I've desperately wanted to hide, but I trust you too much. And then she said, Edward and I have been engaged for 4 years. 4 years. This means Edward had already been engaged before he ever met Elinor, and throughout the entire time their feelings for each other were quietly growing. He kept that secret buried. Elinor's reaction? She didn't cry. She didn't throw things. She didn't confront Edward. She was simply stunned, just for a few brief seconds. Then she did something remarkably rational. She turned the question back on Lucy. You say you desperately wanted to keep this secret. So, why did you tell me? "Do you trust me more than you trust yourself?" One sentence, and it shattered Lucy's facade, because Lucy wasn't really there to Time's talk. She knew Edward had feelings for Elinor. She came to stake her claim. In the film adaptation, Lucy breaks down mid-sentence, pulling out her handkerchief to dab at her tears, every single drop, carefully calculated. But Elinor never falls apart. From that day on, she buried the secret deep inside herself. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell Marianne. Keep caring for the family. Keep wearing that smile. Keep being the strongest big sister in everyone's eyes. Even as her sister Marianne lay shattered by Willoughby's betrayal, sobbing, collapsing, falling completely apart, Elinor was right there beside her, holding her hand, wiping her tears, keeping everything together. And all the while, her own wound, deeper than Marianne's. What kind of capacity is this? Or rather, is it even a capacity at all? Or is it something closer to a wound? There's a passage in the book about her self-awareness. She said, "I keep myself from sinking too deep into grief. It saves me from chewing over the pain again and again. Rational, efficient." End quote. End quote. End quote. The self-protection mechanism works perfectly. But at what cost? The cost is this. She has never once fought for her own feelings, never reached out and grabbed for them. She never once asked Edward, "What are you actually thinking?" She simply waited in silence. And then her moment came. But this stroke of luck had absolutely nothing to do with her character. Lucy Steele, that calculating woman, upon learning that Edward had been disowned by his mother and stripped of his inheritance rights, without a moment's hesitation, she broke off her engagement to him and turned around to marry Edward's younger brother, Robert, because Robert had inherited the fortune that was once meant for Edward. Lucy married money, and so Edward was free. And so Elinor got her ending. Do you see the irony baked into that structure? The most rational, most principled, most self-disciplined heroine in the entire novel, her happiness, in the end, was not something she earned through her own virtue. Ironically, it was another woman's greed that handed it to her, a gift she never could have planned for. But what if Lucy had never changed her heart? What if Lucy had truly, devotedly, loved Edward with everything she had? Those three would find themselves trapped in an impossible deadlock, Edward bound to an engagement he never loved, betraying both himself and Elinor in the process. Lucy stuck with a husband who couldn't give her a thing, never getting the life she longed for. Elinor held on to a love she could never speak aloud, and let it quietly consume her whole life. Three people, all losers, and at the root of it all is one fatal flaw in Edward's character. He was far too indecisive. When he was young, he had feelings for Lucy. Later, the feelings faded, but he couldn't bring himself to end things. Then Elinor came along, and something stirred in him. Still, he said nothing. Lucy was gone, and he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The book even notes that mixed into that relief was a small, almost shameful flicker of secret joy. He got rid of the person he didn't love, and it wasn't even his fault. Perfect. But is this really someone you'd want to entrust your whole life to? His sister-in-law and mother were snobbish and cruel, cutting people down to their faces. After his own mother disowned him, it was Colonel Brandon who stepped in and found him a position as a clergyman. After the wedding, Edward's family actually treated Elinor times worse times than they treated Lucy because Lucy knew how to play the game. Now ask yourself, would you marry a man whose family is like that? Maybe Elinor dares, because what she sees isn't the family, it's Edward himself. A kind person, an upright person, someone who paid an enormous price just to keep their word. But is kindness enough? Is integrity enough? Marianne loved the wrong man, and it cost her a devastating illness. Elinor loved the right man, and it cost her years of silence and a stroke of luck. Between these two prices, which one is heavier to bear? We go back to a scene. At a ball, Marianne is playing the piano. Everyone around her is caught up in their own conversations. Someone tossed out a couple of empty compliments. "You play so well, that sounds beautiful," then turned right back to their gossip. In that entire room, there was only one person truly listening. He stood in the corner, watching her in silence, from the very first note to the very last. His name was Colonel Brandon, 35 years old, always wearing that flannel waistcoat. A yearly income of £2,000 that was a genuinely comfortable living in England at the time. He'd served in the military, traveled to India, seen the world. According to every worldly standard, he was the perfect candidate for a husband. But what was Marianne's verdict on him? Flannel waistcoats. Always wearing flannel waistcoats. This man was perhaps already too old to deserve love. He was 18 years her senior. He lived in a world where a girl was considered past her prime at 20. Against that backdrop, a 35-year-old bachelor might as well have been from another planet. But Brendan wasn't old. He has known pain. He carries a past that no one else knows about. In his youth, he fell in love with a girl named Eliza. They grew up together, childhood sweethearts who had quietly promised themselves to each other. But his father disagreed. Eliza came with a substantial inheritance, and his father had his eye on that money to save the family estate. The father's plan was this: Eliza would marry Brandon's older brother, not Brandon himself. And Brandon? He was shipped off to the army. Eliza was forced into a marriage at 17, a man who never loved her. 2 years later, divorce. Then came a cascade of ruin and abandonment. Finally, Brandon tracked her down in a debtor's prison, gravely ill, utterly destitute, with nothing to her name but a 3-year-old illegitimate daughter by her side. He stayed by her side until she drew her last breath. And in those final moments, she asked one thing of him: "Take care of my daughter." He honored that wish. He raised that girl as his own, found her a good family to stay with, gave her the best education, the best protection. And then the cruel irony of fate. This girl was 16 years old when she met a handsome young man in Bath. She was seduced. She became pregnant, and then she was abandoned. That young man's name was Willoughby. What did Brandon do after learning the truth? He didn't go around broadcasting it. He didn't publicly expose Willoughby. He didn't use any of it to win Marianne's affection. He simply challenged Willoughby to a duel in silence. Both men survived, and then he went on being silent. Until Marianne was hurt by Willoughby and completely fell apart, he finally told Elinor the whole story, not for his own sake. He did all of this to help the two sisters see Willoughby for who he truly was. Did you notice? Colonel Brandon is the one who does the most in this novel. Finding Edward a job, adopting Eliza's daughter, nursing Marianne through her illness, speaking the truth to shield the two sisters. And yet he says the least of all, the silent, good man, the wicked man of silver tongue. People always hear the loudest voice in the room first, and the one who's actually getting things done, they're often standing in the corner somewhere, fading quietly into the background. In the film adaptation, Colonel Brandon is played by Alan Rickman. Yes, the very same man who brought Professor Snape to life in Time's Harry Potter. You ever notice why Rickman always played these kinds of roles? The silent ones, the ones who suffer in quiet, who seem cold on the surface, but who love one person completely, relentlessly, until the very end. Always. In Time's Harry Potter, that word belongs to Snape, but place it on Colonel Brandon's lips, and it fits just as perfectly. Whether you love me or not, whether you see me or not, I am here. In the end, Marianne married him. But was this ending truly a happy one? Jane Austen herself described it this way. Marianne was destined to cast aside that first bloom of love she had known at 17, willingly spending the rest of her life hand in hand with another person. And for this person, she harbored nothing more than deep respect and sincere friendship. Respect, friendship, not love. Where does the heartbreak lie? When Ang Lee was making the film adaptation, he said he wanted it to break people's hearts so completely that they couldn't recover for 2 months. So, where exactly does that heartbreak come from? The tragedy of Marianne lies in this: she did not marry Brandon because she had fallen in love with him. She married him only after Willoughby had broken her heart, after she'd nearly died from the illness that followed, after she'd clawed her way back from the edge and called it returning to reason. She was 17 when she first chased that kind of love, blazing, all-consuming, 2 souls vibrating at the same frequency. And then Willoughby shattered it. She chose the safer path. But on this safer path, is there love? Maybe there is. Maybe there will be. The book tells us that Marianne eventually learned to appreciate Colonel Brandon's qualities and learned to find happiness in tranquility. But in modern society, if a 17-year-old girl, after going through a heartbreak that cut her to the bone, married a man 18 years her senior, she's not drawn to him, yet he checks every box. Do we call that maturity, or do we call that settling? The sharper question is this: what if Willoughby came back 10 years later, divorced, and found Marianne again? Would she waver? Colonel Brandon's love is certain. It runs deep. That will never change. But here's the thing: there is something more painful than not being loved. That's what it means to be loved, while knowing deep down you can never love them back with the same weight. Does Colonel Brandon deserve better? Perhaps. But the phrase deserving better is itself problematic, because love is not a merit system. It's not like whoever does the most good deeds gets to walk away with the best outcome. Brendan's story reminds us, the right person doesn't have to be the first one who walks into your life. But it also tells us something else: being chosen and being deeply loved are 2 very different things. And the distance between these 2 things may be the quietest regret of a person's entire life. So, Jane Austen spent her life writing about other people's love stories, but what about her own? Who did she choose? Who did she let go? And where, exactly, did she hide her answers? Now, let's set the book aside for a moment. Draw our gaze away from Elinor and Marianne and look instead at the woman who breathed them into being: Jane Austen. Born on December 16, 1775, in the village of Steventon, Hampshire, England, a clergyman's daughter, one of 8 children, the 7th, 6 brothers, 1 sister. Her father, George Austen, was no ordinary country clergyman. 2 parish livings combined came to around £230 a year. Not exactly wealthy, but he allowed himself one extravagance. He built up a private library at home, somewhere between 300 and 500 books. In an era when a single book could cost an ordinary person a week's wages, this was practically a gold mine. He gave Jane and her sister Cassandra unrestricted access to read whatever they wished. He never said, "This is no book for a girl." He never said, "You should be learning to sew." He simply left the study door open. Jane Austen would go on to become one of the greatest novelists in the history of English literature. And this was where it all began. On her 19th birthday, her father gave her a writing box. Mahogany opened, and it unfolded into a slanted writing surface, with a hidden compartment on the side that could be locked. She spent her whole life writing with this box. but the world she wrote in was far less elegant than the box itself. The Steventon Rectory, at its busiest, housed anywhere from 16 to 22 people, 8 children, 2 parents, and 4 or 5 male boarding students from the school her father ran. She had no study of her own, no room of her own. She shared a bedroom with her sister Cassandra, and sometimes even a bed. She positioned herself beside a side door that hardly anyone used, hunched over a little table, writing. The writing wasn't done on full sheets of paper, just small slips, one at a time. Fill one up, hide it away, then start the next. But what if someone came? That side door has a quirk. It creaks the moment you push it open. The family said they'd get it fixed. She said, "Don't bother," because that creak, that was her early warning system. She had 3 seconds, the sound of the door, and just 3 seconds to slip that little piece of paper under the blotter and pretend nothing had happened. A woman, hiding behind a creaking door, writing her novel in secret. Why hide? Because back in those days, for a woman to write novels was considered something shameful. The novel itself is a despised literary form. It's not poetry, not drama, not scholarly treatise. It was seen as a frivolous escape from reality. And a woman writing novels? That was lowly upon lowly. Society's consensus was clear: women should hold needles, not pens. Jane Austen held a pen from the age of 11, writing poetry, short stories, and little comic pieces for her family's amusement. Scholars say her adolescent work was filled with anarchic fantasies of female power. Between the ages of 19 and 20, she completed the first draft of Times, Elinor and Marianne, written entirely in letters. Then, at 21 or 22, she rewrote it in the third person, then set it aside, then revised it again after moving to Chawton Cottage at 34. 3 rewrites, 15 years apart. This wasn't a lightning bolt of inspiration. This was a woman spending 15 years, again and again, grinding away at the answer to the same question. That question being, between emotion and reason, which one is truly right? And over those 15 years, she answered it twice with her own life. The first time, 1796, Tom Lefroy. We talked about this at the beginning. A ball, 3 dances, then separation. For financial reasons, 2 families snuffed out everything. But what the story didn't tell us at the start is what she did with those feelings afterward. In November of 1798, Tom's aunt came to visit. The aunt was as warm as ever toward Jane, yet not a single word was spoken of her nephew. Jane didn't ask. She wrote about it later in a letter. "I was too proud to go inquiring after him myself." But her father asked on her behalf. He learned that Tom had gone back to Ireland, preparing to become a lawyer. 2 years had passed. All that was left of that love was a shadow. But she wove the names of Tom's family into her novel, scattered across different characters like hidden codes. This was the first time she chose pride. She chose silence. She chose not to pursue. That was so like Elinor. The second time, December 1802, Harris Bigwither. He's the heir to a wealthy landowner in Hampshire. Money, land, a respectable estate, not particularly handsome, and awkward by nature. But he proposed to Jane. Jane Austen said yes. That night, she must have been thrilled, or, at the very least, relieved. Marrying Bigwigwither would secure her for the rest of her life. Her mother and sister wouldn't have to live under someone else's roof anymore. This was a rational choice, a decent one, the kind everyone would nod and approve of. But the next morning, she woke up. Then she did something. She walked up to Bigwither and withdrew her acceptance. No one knows what she went through that night. No diary, no letters left behind. Cassandra later destroyed a great deal of her private correspondence. All we know is the outcome. She chose not to marry. What was the price of that decision? For the rest of her life, no home to call her own, no steady income to speak of. After her father passed away in 1805, she, her mother, and her sister were left with a combined annual income of just £210, barely enough to match what a governess might earn. She lived entirely on the charity of her brothers. Then, in 1811, Sense and Sensibility Times was published anonymously. The cover simply read, "By a lady." Roughly 750 to 1,000 copies were printed, priced at 15 shillings a set, sold out within 20 months. She made £140. This was the first money she ever earned on her own. Then came 3 more books, Times Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Times Emma. Not a single name, not once did her name appear on the cover of any book. 4 books, a lifetime's total earnings, £684. 1,817. Her body began to fall apart. Back pain, high fever, vomiting. Her skin had become, in her own words, black and white, every color imaginable, just never the right one. In May, she moved to Winchester to be closer to the hospital. On July 15th, just 3 days before she died, she was still dictating a light-hearted little poem about horse racing. At 4:30 inches the morning of July 18th, she rested her head on a pillow placed across her sister Cassandra's lap. Someone asked if there was anything she needed. She said, "Nothing but death. Only death itself would do." She was gone, 41 years old, never married. Lifelong, she never signed her name in any of her own books. 2 days later, Cassandra wrote to her niece, and in that letter, she said something that has stayed with readers ever since. This passage is the final portrait Jane Austen painted of her own life. "I have lost a treasure, such a sister, such a friend, as never can have been surpassed. She is the sun of my life, the gilder of every joy, the soother of every sorrow. There is not one thought I keep from her." I felt as though I had lost a part of myself. 6 months later, Northanger Abbey Times and Times Persuasion Times were published posthumously. She finally had a name, Jane Austen. But it only came after her death. It was her brother, Henry, who in his preface first revealed the author's identity to the world. So let's return to that question. What was her answer? Really? Marry for love or marry for money? Neither. She once wrote a letter to her niece Fanny. Somewhere in this letter lies a line I believe serves as the ultimate footnote to all of Times: Sense and Sensibility. Anything is more bearable than a marriage without love. Anything, including poverty, including loneliness, including dying at 41 with your head in your sister's lap and only a few £100 left in the bank. She also once said, "Single women have a terrible tendency toward poverty." She wasn't blind to the cost. She knew it all. And yet, she chose it anyway. In that morning, before Bigger Thomas, knowing full well the price she would pay, she lived what she wrote. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Times Thinking Fast and Slow. In it, he proposed a theory. The human brain operates on 2 separate systems. System 1, fast, intuitive, emotional. It makes judgments on gut feeling. You see someone, and within a tenth of a second, you've already decided whether you like them or not. System 2, slow, rational, analytical, weighing pros and cons, calculating gains and losses. It takes a long time to reach a conclusion. Does any of this sound familiar? System 1, that's Marianne. Heartbeat is the answer. Soul resonance is everything. The rest can wait. System 2, this is Elinor. Feelings are unreliable. Data is reliable. Plans are reliable. Self-disciplined, dependable. 200 years ago, Jane Austen had never read Kahneman. and yet she wrote the same book. So, what was Kahneman's conclusion? Two systems, both capable of error. System 1 makes you impulsive, falling for Willoughby, getting swept up in sweet-talking charm, losing all sense of judgment to the sound of your own heartbeat. System 2 can make you sluggish, hesitant like Edward, silently enduring like Elinor, letting slip the very things you should have fought for. The smartest move isn't to pick one or the other. It's to let both systems talk to each other. There's a concept in psychotherapy called the wise mind. It means not letting reason overpower emotion, nor letting emotion drown out reason, but finding that place where the two can meet. At that precise moment, you can hear your own heartbeat and see reality with perfect clarity. And that is exactly where time's Sense and Sensibility times ends. Marianne finally learned to find security in reason. Elinor finally allowed herself to shed tears in front of Edward. Two people, each taking one step toward the other. But Jane Austen went further than any of her characters ever did. She didn't choose reason. If she had, she would have married Big Wither. She didn't choose sensibility either, otherwise she would have burned herself out for Tom Lefroy, just like Marianne. She chose a third path, to be herself. Don't marry for money. Don't marry for love. Marry your pen instead. Does this path come with a price? It does. A lifetime of poverty. A lifetime of leaning on her brother's charity. 41 years old, dead, and barely anything left in the bank. But was the path worth it? September 14th, 2017. The Bank of England released a new £10 note. The Queen on the front, a writer on the back. Jane Austen. That woman, the one who hid behind a creaking door, who wrote on tiny scraps of paper, who never once dared to sign her name, her face, stamped onto the coins that every person in England touches every single day. On the banknote, they chose a quote from her book, I declare after all, there is no enjoyment like reading, from Time's Pride and Prejudice. She hated perfection above all else. In the letters she wrote to her niece during the final months of her life, she said, a perfect portrait. You know, the kind always makes me feel sick. She's not a perfect person. She's cutting. She's sharp-tongued. She once wrote in a letter, I do not wish people to be very agreeable, as it saves me the trouble of liking them very much. But she was an honest woman. She wrote it down with unflinching honesty. In a world where a woman couldn't even open a bank account, love was a luxury she couldn't afford. She also lived out another truth, with equal honesty, that even a luxury, even something precious and rare, should never be sold off cheap. 200 years later, we live in a completely different world. Women can work, own property, open bank accounts, and build a perfectly good life on their own. But the question remains, no longer marry for money or marry for love. It comes down to this: should I choose someone who makes my heart race, or someone who makes me feel safe? Should I settle for a relationship where everything checks out on paper but the spark just isn't there, or keep waiting for a soulmate who might never show up? I keep asking myself, am I making a times mature choice, or am I simply times giving up? There's no right answer. Jane Austen never gave us one. 200 years of readers couldn't give it. Psychologists couldn't either. But perhaps the standard answer itself was never the point. What truly matters is this: when you make your choices, you are wide awake. You know what it feels like when your heart races. And you know that heartbeat will one day stop. You know what it means to feel safe. You know that security can be just another kind of cage. You know that being alone can be perfectly fine. And you also know that two can be better than one, but only if that person is truly worth it. Jane Austen, on that morning in 1802, withdrew her acceptance. Not because she had found clarity about the answer, but because she had found clarity about herself. She knows who she is. She knows what she wants. She knew she'd rather spend her whole life writing novels in poverty than slowly fade into silence inside a respectable marriage. This wasn't courage. This was clarity. And clarity of mind that is something rarer than either reason or feeling. So, in the end, Jane Austen wrote two sisters. One traded her feelings for security, one who has been battered and bruised by her own emotions. But in the end, it was the author herself who forged a third path. She married neither the man who set her heart racing, nor the man who gave her peace of mind. And instead, she married herself. She traded 41 years of solitude and poverty for a face that would appear 2 centuries after her death on the most widely circulated banknote in England. And here's a question I'd like to leave you with at the end. Marrying for money is one choice, and marrying for love is another. But to marry yourself, do you even know who you are? I'm Fanko. Thank you all for staying with me through this journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one. 2.